Morning folks, and welcome back. This video is all about the modifications I made to my Hennessy hammock. I got this hammock for a really good price, used from eBay, and it's a great hammock. There's some really unusual features on it, but at the same time there are some features that I don't like. I've already made some alterations to it, but the biggest modification is what I'm going to be tackling today. One of the changes I've already made is to swap the suspension. The Hennessy hammock comes with a thick rope suspension normally and a wide sort of seatbelt type strap which goes around the tree. I'm not a big fan of that. I find it big and clunky and heavy, so I use whippy slings and continuous loops attached to the hammock itself. I followed a tutorial on YouTube that shows you how to remove this end cap here, which is cable tied on, and take off the old suspension and replace it. I'll put a link to that video in the description box below. I also ditched the rain fly that comes with this hammock. It comes with a small tarp fly which clips onto the suspension normally. But it's not very big. It's only really big enough to cover the hammock itself. So I've taken that off because I prefer a larger tarp, which is more versatile. I can use it when it's not being used with the hammock, and it offers a lot more protection. This model is called the Explorer Asym, which means it's asymmetrical. The cut of the hammock is such that when you lie diagonally, you can get into an almost flat position, which is a lot more comfortable in a hammock. Built into the hammock and underneath the mosquito netting is a structural ridge line. This runs from one end of the hammock to the other, and it's what gives the hammock its form. So no matter how you hang your hammock, it will always hang in the right shape, and it keeps that mosquito net up and off your face. Now, one of the features which is unique to a lot of the models within the Hennessy range is the way that you get in and out of their hammocks. There's a Velcro opening underneath the hammock, and you climb in and out through that opening. Once you're in, the Velcro snaps back together again, and it makes a secure, solid base underneath you. It's an interesting alternative to a conventional zip, and I'm sure in warm climates it will be ideal if you haven't got to use any insulation underneath you, or if you use a sleeping pad inside your hammock, that would be fine. I tend to use an underblanket in my hammock because I live in the UK and it can get cold here, and that's where the problem lies. Once you've got an underblanket slung underneath your hammock, that bottom entry is no longer usable. You know, the underblanket is in the way. So I'm going to add a zip. I'm going to keep the bottom entry opening because that might be useful in the future, but what I am going to do is add a zip. It's going to be a full length zip going from one end all the way to the other, a double-ended zip so that I can open it right up. I'm going to use the original hem of the hammock here to attach one side of my zip, and the other side will be attached to the netting itself. Now obviously, in order for this zip to work, I'm going to have to cut this netting, and the problem with cutting it is because it's stretchy, what it tends to do is just roll up, and then you have a nightmare of a time trying to sew the other half of the zip on. So before I cut anything, I'm going to just pin on a piece of webbing all the way along where I want my zip to go, where I want the other part of my zip to go, and then I'm going to sew that onto the netting before I cut it, if that makes sense. And that way it's all kind of keeps its shape, keeps its position relative to that hem that's already on there. Right, sewing. Okay, I'm all set up and ready to go. I'm going to use my new sewing machine to do this, which is an industrial machine, but you can just as easily do this on a domestic machine or even by hand if you haven't got access to a sewing machine. I just think I probably ought to use my new machine because it terrifies me, and I need all the practice I can get at using it. This is the hem of the hammock, where the bottom part of the hammock joins the mosquito netting. This little strip here is the mosquito netting itself, and I've just got about 10 millimeters, about a centimetre of that mosquito netting, and it's folded over, and that's where I'm going to sew, just along the edge where it's folded. And this is the webbing tape, which I've pinned on. I've aligned the edge of the mosquito netting with the centre line of that webbing, so when I stitch it I can then fold this over, and I've got somewhere where I can sew my zip on, if that makes sense. I'll remove the pins as I go. That will then kind of hold that netting together. That'll make it a lot easier for sewing the zip on, which is why I'm doing it this way. Right, that is now sewn on along this edge here. So no more pins for me to jab my finger on, which is good. The next thing is to cut the mosquito net. So I'm going to cut as close to this hem here as I can. I'm going to get right in there and cut along, and then I will have a big opening, and then I can sew both sides of the zip on with ease because I've got an edge to work on, if you see what I mean, rather than having to work in the middle of something with a tiny little opening without access. I'm going to start my cut about 25mm or an inch from the end of the bit of webbing tape. I'm just going to start it by going in with this, which is a quick unpicker. It's like got a blade on it for cutting threads, but I can just start my cut off with that. So I've got a little hole now, and I should be able to get my scissors in there. It'll probably be easier. I'm going to fold the other half of the webbing over, line it up along the centre line, and just run a line of stitching along this edge here. And now I have a nice, neat hemmed edge, which is reinforced and much easier to sew the zip onto. The zip I'm using is a double-ended YKK spiral zip, and I'll put a link to the size of this in the description box below the video. This is much longer than I need, so I'm just going to start at one end and start sewing it onto the original hem on the hammock, the bit where I cut the mosquito net off from. I will keep the zip closed while I do that, so I'll sew it all the way along. I'll probably need to move the sliders out of the way as I go, otherwise they're going to get in the way of the foot on the sewing machine. Yeah, they're double-ended because you can obviously move the sliders to where you want in the hammock. You can have them near your head if you prefer that, or in the middle of the hammock, whatever you prefer. And obviously you can open it up using either slider. So it's ideal. I'm going to put my zip inside the hammock so that the hem is actually on the outside, if that makes sense. And it's important here that you leave a good gap. Don't sew it so close to the teeth that you end up snagging it on the fabric of the hem every time you zip it or unzip it. I've always found that if you keep it a good couple of mil away from the teeth, it works okay. Once you get to the other end, just cut the excess zip off. I've left about 1.5 inches on there that I can tuck away, and then I will sew across this to stop the zip pullers from going too far and unzipping off the end. I'm now going to reinforce this by stitching it again. I'm going to turn it over to do that and run a line of stitching along the edge of that zip tape there. Now that I've got one side sewn on, I'm going to line up the other side, the side with the mosquito netting on, and this is probably the hardest bit to get right. You've got a bit that's still attached at the top here, so you can see where it is there, and just try and get it in the right place. Now you're going to have to open the zip here to be able to get that over the machine. Just be careful when you do that you don't run the zip runner off the end of the zip, because they're a real pain to get back on again. So just open it up a bit. When you're happy that it's in the right place, you could pin that if you wanted to, or you could just pinch it between your finger and thumb and then offer it up to the machine. Put the presser foot down, put the needle through, and it'll lock it in place while you get yourself organised. And that's going to get the same double stitching as the other half of the zip. And the last thing to do is just to cover up the end here. I'm going to make a tab using the same webbing. I've just folded over the end, and that's going to be stitched across and over the end here. And it's going to not only tidy up the end and cover up that raw edge, but it's also going to create a stop so that the zip can't unzip any further than that, and therefore run off the end of the zip, if you see what I mean. That will stop it from going any further. And that is it, done. Time to go and try it out. I am really happy with that. That is a great improvement. I can now lounge in the hammock. I can get in and out easily even if my under blanket is attached, and yeah, just loads better. Of course, you could just go and buy a hammock with a side entry zip, and Hennessy in fact do a zip option on their hammocks. Like I said before, I bought this second hand and it came as it is. I don't mind though, because now I've got two options. I've got the original bottom entry and I've got a side zip entry as well. And besides, I like modifying gear. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.